The katana never failed on the battlefield. It was never the primary weapon on the battlefield. That is a completely different problem, and the entire mythology built around this sword collapses once you understand which problem the katana was actually designed to solve. The internet version of the katana is a battlefield weapon, folded 1,000 times, differentially hardened, engineered to lethal perfection over centuries of warfare. Every part of that is technically accurate. Every part of that misidentifies what the sword was built for. The katana was not refined as a war weapon. It reached its peak form during Japan's Edo period, 1603 to 1868, a span of over 2 centuries during which Japan experienced almost no significant external conflict. The weapon that defines the samurai in the global imagination was optimized during the longest peace in Japanese feudal history. On actual Sengoku period battlefields, the weapons of mass deployment were the yari, the spear, and the yumi, the longbow. Wikipedia's own entry on the katana states it plainly. The main weapons on the Sengoku battlefield were yumi, yari, and tanegashima, the matchlock musket. The katana and tachi were used only for close combat when everything else had failed or broken. This is not a marginal footnote. It is the structural reality of Japanese warfare that the mythology has buried under 2 centuries of Edo period romanticism. And understanding why requires understanding what tamahagane actually is, and more importantly, what it isn't. Tamahagane is steel produced from iron sand in a tatara furnace over 36 to 72 continuous hours of burning. The process consumes around 10 tons of iron sand and 12 tons of charcoal and produces a bloom called kira. Only around 25% of that bloom is usable steel of the quality swordsmiths actually want. That usable portion has carbon content ranging from roughly 0.6 to 1.5% within a single bloom. A low-carbon section that wants to behave as a flexible spine can sit directly adjacent to a high-carbon section that wants to behave as a hard edge inside the same block of raw material you just pulled from the furnace. The smith breaks the bloom apart, assesses each fragment by color, texture, and fracture pattern, and sorts it by estimated carbon content before a single fold begins. This is the constraint the folding solved, not weakness, inconsistency. Repeated folding averages out carbon distribution across the material. A section at 0.2% carbon next to a section at 1.2% becomes, after sufficient working, something approaching a predictable and manageable 0.7%. The folding was standardization, not purification. Sulfur and phosphorus impurities do not burn out through mechanical working. They stay in the matrix, which is exactly why the sorting process happened first. Folding solved distribution. Sorting solved contamination. These were 2 separate engineering operations solving 2 separate problems. And the myth collapses both into a single story about spiritual discipline overcoming bad steel. What it was actually describing was material science conducted without a laboratory. The actual breakthrough was yaki-ire, differential hardening. The smith applies clay slip of varying thickness along the blade, thick on the spine, thin, or absent at the edge. During quenching, the edge cools rapidly, forming hard martensite capable of holding extreme sharpness at around 60 HRC. The spine, insulated by thick clay, cools slowly, retaining flexible perlite at roughly 40 to 45 HRC. 2 different crystalline structures in the same piece of steel. The visible result is the hamon, the temper line that runs along the blade. Metallurgist Yoshindo Yoshihara documented that the hamon is not decorative. It is a functional record of the phase boundary between martensite and perlite. You can read the entire quenching process in the blade itself. The smith's decisions are permanently encoded in the geometry of the light. This is where the katana becomes genuinely extraordinary, and also where its structural limitation becomes impossible to ignore. That 60 HRC martensitic edge is phenomenal at cutting unarmored flesh. It holds a geometry so acute that the blade travels through a target almost without resistance. But that same hardness is brittle under lateral stress. Not because Japanese swordsmiths made errors, because the physics cannot be resolved any other way. Maximum sharpness requires maximum hardness. Maximum hardness produces brittleness under impact. You cannot design your way out of that constraint. You can only design a combat system that avoids triggering it. And that is precisely what happened. Kenjutsu manuals did exactly that. Miyamoto Musashi's Go-Rin no Sho written between 1643 and 1645, builds its entire strategic framework around controlling engagement conditions before contact occurs. Timing, distance, angle, the positioning of your body relative to the opponent's blade before either weapon makes any commitment. The system is not built around absorbing blade contact. It is built around preventing it. You redirect with the flat. You deflect with the mun, the spine. Direct edge-to-edge engagement is treated as a failure of technique, not a viable tactical option. Compare that to European longsword manuals from Johannes Liechtenauer's tradition in the late 1300s and early 1400s, where binding is described as standard operating procedure. You catch your opponent's blade on your edge, apply lever pressure, and strike from the bind. That only works if your edge survives repeated hard contact. European combat assumed edge durability because European spring-tempered steel at 50 to 55 HRC uniform hardness could flex under impact and recover. The entire tactical doctrine was built on that material property. Kenjutsu was built on the opposite one. Both systems were internally consistent. Neither was wrong. They were engineering responses to different steel. This contrast explains why the katana excelled in its actual design context and became structurally mismatched outside of it. The Sengoku battlefield deployed the yari in tight ashigaru formations precisely because formation fighting collapses the individual timing and distance control that kenjutsu depends on entirely. You cannot execute precise footwork when you are shoulder to shoulder with 40 other soldiers pressing forward into a pike line. You cannot control the angle of engagement when attacks are arriving from multiple directions simultaneously. The katana's entire performance envelope requires conditions that formation warfare systematically destroys. The yari was cheaper to produce, required far less training to deploy effectively in a tight formation, and did not depend on perfect technique to remain structurally intact under the grinding contact of mass infantry combat. So, the katana retreated from the battlefield and into exactly the context where it performs without rival: the personal encounter, the duel. The sudden confrontation between two individuals in an open space with enough room to execute the system properly. In that context, differential hardening and precise blade geometry produce an instrument that nothing in the world cuts more cleanly. The draw cut, where the curve causes the edge to travel diagonally through the target rather than simply chopping into it, delivers continuous slicing force through the full arc of the stroke. Against unarmored flesh with proper technique and distance, the katana is close to a perfect instrument for what it does. The Edo period turned that context into the dominant one for samurai culture, and 2 centuries of aesthetic refinement followed. Tsuba became more ornate. Saya became lacquered. Blade geometry became more precise, more elegant, more focused on the single decisive cut in open space. The sword became the soul of the samurai, which is a genuinely meaningful cultural designation, and also a description of a peace period status object that had been removed from mass battlefield deployment for generations before anyone attached that meaning to it. The katana that the world thinks of as the supreme battlefield weapon was already a cultural artifact when its mythology was being written. The mythology spread for the same structural reason it always does. Living tradition beats archaeological reconstruction in the popular imagination. When Western audiences encountered Japanese sword culture after World War II, they encountered practicing masters who could demonstrate their craft in person, explain their lineage, show the hamon as it moved under the light. European longsword knowledge had to be rebuilt from manuscripts and skeletal remains. The asymmetry had nothing to do with which tradition produced superior combat outcomes. It had everything to do with which one was still breathing when the comparison was being made. Kurosawa films closed the rest of the gap. A generation of global audiences watched samurai cinema and associated every element of that visual aesthetic with peak martial effectiveness, when what they were watching was a culture that had spent 250 years of peace transforming a close-quarter sidearm into a national symbol. The katana is not overrated as a cutting instrument. In the conditions it was built for, it is the most refined version of that instrument that has ever been produced. The metallurgy is not compensation for bad steel. The combat doctrine is not a workaround for a fragile edge. Both are precisely optimized responses to a specific set of constraints: inconsistent raw material, lamellar armor, individual combat at close range, and a tactical environment that rewarded the single decisive cut over everything else. The constraint was never the steel. The constraint was that the conditions